What is happening in Ukraine is phenomenal. In just a few years, it has gone from being a country that was completely dependent on foreign military aid to becoming a key player in the new global military order. And we're not exaggerating. War has changed, and Ukraine has exactly what is needed. You could say that its fledgling military industry is operating right where the rest of the world is most in need. Which is why this country is becoming almost an indispensable supplier. Don't believe me? Well, just look at how, in recent weeks, Zelensky has become a true diplomatic rock star that half the world is lining up to talk to, particularly the governments of one very specific region. You know which one I'm talking about, right?
Zelensky tours, bombarded Mideast in search of new rich allies. Ukraine struck 10-year cooperation agreements with Saudi Arabia and Qatar, while another is in the works with the UAE, Zelensky said.
Of course, the tour isn't limited to the Gulf countries. So far this year, Zelensky has been on a veritable diplomatic marathon across half the world. Just to give you an idea, in January he visited France, Switzerland and Lithuania. In February, he was in Germany. In March, he visited Romania, returned to France, travelled to the UK, visited Spain, and also Jordan. And in April, we've seen him in Turkey, and even in Syria. So what is the purpose of these trips? Well, obviously, each stop has its own nuances. And yes, of course, he went to many of these countries to seek military aid. But it's not just that. The truth is that, increasingly, the Ukrainian president's goal is to position his country within the new ecosystem emerging in the military industry. In other words, he's looking to secure military agreements, sell weapons, sell technology, attract investment, boost technological cooperation, and provide services. A whole range of options with a very specific mission: to secure more sources of revenue and technology for his own military industry now that the United States has definitively cut off the flow. Revenue and resources that will help this industry grow and thus sustain the war effort against Russia. Pay close attention to everything we're going to tell you in this video. Let's get started. But before we continue, imagine this for a second. You lose your laptop, or your account gets compromised. Photos, documents, personal files, gone. Or worse, in someone else's hands. It sounds extreme, but it happens more often than we think. And most people only realize how exposed their data is when it's already too late. The truth is, most of us have traded convenience for privacy without even realizing it. But don't worry, there is a solution: Proton. Proton brings together two essential tools, Proton Mail and Proton Drive, under a single account. That means your emails and your files are not only in one place, but also fully protected with end-to-end encryption. And here's the key part: not even Proton itself can access your data. Unlike Google and Microsoft, you are the only one in control. With Proton Mail, your inbox becomes a lot safer and cleaner. It actively blocks phishing attempts, filters out spam, and even lets you create email aliases, so you can sign up for services without exposing your real address. And then there's Proton Drive. This is where things get really interesting. You can store documents, photos, or anything important, completely encrypted, whether it's personal files, work documents, or even sensitive information like contracts or budgets. Everything stays private. You can also share files securely, using passwords or expiring links, and even collaborate on documents without worrying about your data being scanned, sold, or used to train AI models. And honestly, that's the big difference. Unlike big tech platforms, Proton doesn't rely on advertising or data collection. Your emails and files are yours, period. Everything stays organized, synced across your devices, and easy to access without giving up your privacy. So if there's one takeaway here, it's this: take control of your digital life. And want to know the best part? Using Proton Drive and Proton Mail is free. You only pay if you want a more advanced plan, such as more storage. So you don't need to spend money to have a secure email or store your data safely and privately. You can protect yourself right now using the QR code on the screen or the link in the description. VisualPolitik community, Zelensky isn't travelling just for the sake of travelling, and he's no longer just seeking aid. No, he's trying to put Ukraine on the map as an indispensable military partner, and there are two good reasons for that. The first, as I was saying, war has changed radically.
Until recently, war relied on brute force. Armies would assemble large numbers of soldiers, tanks, and equipment, hoping to break through enemy lines, and when possible, they'd deploy massive fleets of fighter jets. However, technological advances have completely transformed combat in a very short time.
These days, drones, satellites, thermal cameras, and all kinds of sensors mean that sheer force alone is no longer enough. Today, low-cost drones can disable and destroy much more expensive equipment, from tanks to anti-aircraft interceptors. Right now, devices that are easy to produce at a cost of just a few $1,000s per unit can pose a massive headache for armies, with equipment costing millions. Iran is a fantastic example, but of course, so is the war in the Donbass. And that's why armies around the world are now scrambling to catch up, to equip themselves with thousands of drones, sensors, and all kinds of modern equipment, along with the systems to defend against them. A full-blown international race has broken out. Take, for example, what just happened in Estonia.
Estonia halts 500 million euros combat vehicle procurement to fund air defense.
Exactly. The government has cancelled the purchase of combat vehicles in order to spend the money on anti-drone systems. And of course, this is just one example of many we can find. This is the new trend in military markets. Well, that's the first reason behind Zelensky's plan. The second is that, as of today, there is probably no country better prepared for this new military paradigm than Ukraine. Why? Because during 4 years of total war, Ukraine has not only held out, it has built a completely new military ecosystem, tailored precisely to the needs of this new type of warfare. These days, Ukraine manufactures long-range systems capable of striking targets thousands of kilometers away at low cost. The best example is the FP-5 Flamingo missile, with a range of about 2,900 kilometers. That's over 1,800 miles. Enough to strike refineries, air bases, and logistics centers deep within Russian territory. But above all, Ukraine has completely revolutionized the use of FPV drones, small kamikaze drones that cost barely $500 to $2,000, and already account for 80 to 85% of all attacks on the Donbass front. And of course, they've also developed interceptor drones, specifically designed to shoot down enemy drones in mid-flight. Interceptors that are fast, cheap, and perfect for countering Russian swarms without having to waste missiles that cost millions. That's what's happening in the Middle East, and the reason why everyone is currently welcoming Zelensky with open arms. But keep in mind that the Ukrainian industry hasn't limited itself to the skies. They've also created some of the most effective naval drones in the world. And on top of that comes a massive leap in electronic warfare and autonomy. Ukraine currently has inexpensive drones capable of navigating without GPS thanks to advanced inertial systems, software to coordinate entire swarms, and fiber optic controlled platforms. But the craziest part of all isn't just that Ukraine is capable of designing and manufacturing these systems. What's truly staggering is the scale at which they're doing this, because right now, Ukraine already has the potential capacity to produce up to 10 million drones per year. To put this into perspective, the entire industrial base of the United States combined is barely capable of manufacturing around 100,000 units. And remember, this is no exception. With other types of low-cost, mass-produced weaponry, which is precisely what Ukraine is specializing in, it's a very similar story. And everything points to the fact that this capacity can still grow much further. In 2025 alone, the Ukrainian military industry as a whole grew by 50%. And in specific sectors, such as ground robotic systems, the jump was a staggering 488% in a single year. And the most incredible thing is that all of this is happening while the country still has 45% of its industrial capacity unused, simply due to a lack of investment. So imagine what they could produce at full capacity if the contracts and dollars start rolling in. In other words, Ukraine is becoming a full-fledged military-industrial power, capable of producing more than it consumes and poised to become a major exporter of weapons, technology, and military services. And in doing so, it will secure the foreign currency it needs to keep fighting.
Ukraine eyes multi-billion-dollar wartime defense exports. Ukraine is preparing to enter the global defense export market while still at war, with officials estimating that military goods and services exports could reach several $billion in 2026.
Clearly, it won't be short on customers. Among them are giants with overflowing coffers. Think about it. The United States has its arsenals at rock bottom and is severely lacking in this new type of low-cost equipment. The Gulf countries are in the same or worse shape. For years, they've been buying extremely expensive equipment, but the problem is that such equipment is limited. Take the Patriots, for example. They're a formidable air defense system, but if you're under extensive attack from cheap drones, your interceptors, which are extremely expensive, will run out very quickly. So they urgently need to buy cheap, lethal drones and systems to cover their backs in a modern war. And I can tell you right now that they won't spare any expense. Then there's the fact that all of Europe is starting to rearm at a pace not seen in decades, and they need that equipment too. In other words, if Ukraine plays its cards right, this could turn into a massive flood of capital and contracts pouring into the country. Fresh, massive amounts of money, just what it needs to survive today and rise up tomorrow. Of course, that's not all. There are more questions we need to answer. Exactly what changes could this new capability bring to the war with Russia? To what extent could this industry become the economic pillar of reconstruction? What obstacles do they face? Well, that's exactly what we're going to look at. First of all, there's one fundamental matter we need to tell you about: the state of Ukraine's economy. And look, after a 30% collapse in 2022, the economy managed to achieve something close to stability. In 2025, it grew by 2.2%, and 1.8% is expected for 2026, and 1.5% in 2027. How is this possible? Very simple: through the war effort. That stability is basically sustained by massive military spending and a gigantic deficit that will hover around 20% of GDP in 2026. A financial black hole that stays afloat only thanks to funding received from abroad, practically all of it from the European Union. In other words, the economy is functioning, but on life support. That is why Washington's decision to turn off the tap was a massive blow to Ukrainian expectations. For now, the European Union is digging into its own pockets, though Orban has so far been putting all sorts of brakes on the process. However, his replacement, Mayor, has already called for the Hungarian veto to be lifted. In any case, Ukraine needs more, much more, to be able to hold out. And that's not the only problem. Trump's new policy and the sluggish pace at which the European military industry is ramping up also made one thing clear to the Ukrainians: they couldn't simply rely on foreign aid. They had to step up their own military production as much as possible and secure new sources of income that are completely autonomous. And they also saw an opportunity. If Ukraine establishes itself as a major producer and exporter of drones, ammunition, and inexpensive, efficient equipment, Western aid would cease to be merely aid. It would become contracts that are much easier to maintain. And there's an additional benefit. If Ukraine manages to scale up its autonomous production, it's possible, though the probability is small, that Vladimir Putin will finally realize that his war is a folly that's going nowhere. So that is exactly what they have done. In an almost miraculous way, they have managed to launch an enormous industrial capacity. A capacity that is now also generating a great deal of innovation. That is not only allowing them to hold their ground better on the front lines, but also to strike a very hard blow against Russia.
40% of Russia's oil export capacity is out of service following Ukraine's attacks.
And it's also allowing them to place sales all over the world. Keep in mind, this last point is extremely important. Not only because of the dollars it allows them to secure today, but also for the post-war period itself. Because this industry could have a massive impact once the war ends. Let me explain. Ukraine today is not a normal economy. It is basically a war economy. Everything is geared toward the front lines. Production, spending, labor. Everything operates under exceptional circumstances. And the problem is that normally, when a war ends, this structure collapses all at once. Military factories become obsolete. The budget shrinks. Thousands of workers lose their jobs. Human capital is wasted. And the economy enters a severe downturn. That's the classic day aftershock. But of course, even if the war ends tomorrow, Ukraine will need to keep not only its economy afloat, but also sustain massive military spending to protect itself from any future Russian aggression. Well, herein lies the key. Exports and trade are crucial so that once the war is over, Ukraine can keep its military production capacity running at full speed. In other words, it's the way to ensure the country doesn't suddenly cease to be a war economy. This industry, along with all the innovation and technology that comes with it, could even become a real driver for reconstruction. At least that's how many Ukrainians are beginning to see the Ukraine of tomorrow, as the great breadbasket it has always been, but also as a massive hub for the production of military equipment. A highly specialized country with huge companies attracting a great deal of international capital to invest in its military industry. In fact, they aspire to become a kind of military contractor for the entire European Union. Now, to what extent is this realistic? How attractive is this industry really? Well, let's take a look. To understand whether this industry can truly attract massive amounts of capital and become the country's economic engine, we first need to see what makes it so different. The fact is, what has been built in Ukraine is not a military industry in the traditional sense. It's something completely new. It is quite literally an ecosystem that does not currently exist anywhere else on the planet. A system tailored for the new military paradigm. All of this has been developed in an environment that bears much more resemblance to the world of startups than to the classic government-linked military complexes. Of course, this development hasn't happened by chance. It has a lot to do with the very policies that Zelensky's government has implemented over the past few years. A very clear example of what we're talking about is in their procurement system. You see, in almost every army in the world, purchasing equipment is a centralized, slow, and highly bureaucratic process. Not in Ukraine. There, a dual model operates that combines the best of both worlds. On the one hand, there is a centralized system for large-scale purchases, but at the same time, there is a completely decentralized system that grants total autonomy to brigades, units, and even small frontline groups to acquire or develop whatever they need on their own. In other words, the key is that each brigade has its own budget, which it can spend as it sees fit. This creates a level of operational flexibility that virtually no other army in the world possesses. For example, if at a certain point on the front they realize that a specific type of drone works better, or simply that local pilots are more accustomed to that model, they can purchase it immediately, without having to go through the slow bureaucracy of the traditional system. All of this works thanks to DotChain, an internal digital marketplace that allows units to order practically everything they need. To put it simply, it's a kind of military Uber Eats, where instead of food, brigades can order drones, spare parts, batteries, tools, electronic components, whatever they need, and they receive it quickly, without paperwork or delays. And what's really interesting is that this system isn't just for buying equipment, it enables something far more revolutionary, turning logistics into a direct driver of innovation on the battlefield. Today, in various areas of the front lines, there are mobile research and development workshops, small spaces where engineers and soldiers work side by side. Everything happens in real time. For example, if a unit detects that the Russians have changed their tactics, or if a soldier has an idea to improve a drone or a vehicle part, that information is immediately communicated to the engineer at the mobile workshop. The engineer analyzes the proposal, proposes solutions, and through the dot chain, requests the necessary materials to make the relevant modifications. Then, once the part or prototype is ready, it is tested directly in combat. Its performance is observed, and it is adjusted again if necessary. And if all goes well, companies adopt that change immediately, modifying their equipment, launching new variants, and adjusting the entire production chain. In this way, the war in Ukraine has become a veritable pressure cooker of innovation. Remember, don't just think of super expensive stuff. As I mentioned before, we're talking about a low-cost war. So take a look. A crystal clear example was recently published by the 46th Ukrainian Airborne Brigade, showing FPV drones equipped with a fishing rod. Yeah, a fishing rod mounted on a drone to shoot down Russian drones. At first glance, it seems like utter nonsense, but it's also a testament to the ingenuity, creativity, and constant innovation that this novel system enables. With it, the entire innovation cycle, from the initial idea through design and manufacturing to testing and final improvements, is completed in a matter of hours or days, not months or years, as is the case in traditional militaries. The result is a level of ultra-rapid adaptation unprecedented in modern military history. And this explains why, right now, the world's most effective drones are being manufactured in Ukraine. What's more, the entire administration and bureaucracy have adapted and specialized with one goal in mind: to facilitate the work of the military industry. And that completely changes the dynamic. In Ukraine, military companies can manufacture, adjust, and deploy new technologies without the endless delays required in the United States or the rest of Europe. They can hire faster, produce faster, and test faster. And that means one thing: competitiveness. And let's not even mention the experience this is giving them. No Western army has tested tens of thousands of prototypes in actual combat. No European or American manufacturer has had innovation cycles of just 48 hours under enemy fire. No military institution receives direct, daily, raw feedback on what works and what doesn't, with data pulled from the battlefield almost instantly. Well, the point is that all of that learning is worth its weight in gold, and all of this together has created a truly unique ecosystem, capable of mass production and of addressing the new challenges of modern warfare. This is something for which many governments around the world, starting with the sheikhs of the Persian Gulf, will be willing to pay many billions.
Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Ukraine sign an air defense agreement.
To top it all off, Ukraine also has labor costs that are much lower than in any Western economy. The average wage in Ukraine is 85% below the OECD average, about $650 a month compared to $4,500 in developed countries. This makes the country a real sweet spot for international investment, especially once the war ends. It will be much cheaper to set up military factories there and take advantage of its massive cluster and know-how, something like what's happening in China but focused on the military sector. And that explains why investment is already pouring in.
EIFO has issued its first guarantee to a Danish company investing in the Ukrainian defense industry. The investment aims to scale up the production of equipment for electronic drone defense, thus marking the beginning of the state-backed €134 million investment guarantee.
And there's plenty of news like this. But the most interesting thing is that all of this is just the beginning. And in Ukraine, they already have plans to accelerate this process. For instance, they are planning to open up to 10 international export centers in allied countries. These will be technology exhibition spaces, where Ukrainian drones can be seen in action, and where the necessary modifications to meet the needs of each army can be studied and developed. They are also actively seeking to forge international industrial partnerships. Ukraine does not want to develop on its own, because that would greatly limit its potential. That is why the government wants to secure strategic partners who can provide technology, capital, and market access. And it's working. Companies in France are already setting up joint production lines to manufacture ammunition and ground systems. Germany is developing drones and military robots by combining its engineering expertise with Ukrainian combat experience. The United Kingdom is collaborating on the development of naval systems and missiles, and several US companies are investing in electronic warfare and artificial intelligence equipment and technology created by Ukrainian firms. All of this is part of the Build with Ukraine concept, one of the Zelensky administration's major initiatives. On top of that, to ensure this all works, they have created an incentive system called Defense City. It's a program that offers reduced taxes, simplified procedures, and state support to defense companies, both Ukrainian and foreign, so they can produce directly within the country. As I've already mentioned, the ultimate goal is ambitious: to turn Ukraine into a global hub for military innovation and production, a key player in Western supply chains, and an exporter of both cutting-edge and low-cost technology. It's an ambitious goal, but one that could be the key to the country's resilience, and even to its emerging stronger after the war. Even so, there is one significant problem: the brain drain. Think about it. Ukraine is still at war. So many engineers, technicians, and experts who have developed all this know-how might be tempted to seek more stable or lucrative opportunities in other countries. And not surprisingly, keeping them in Ukraine, motivated and working under wartime conditions, is crucial, but also poses a huge challenge. In any case, this is the opportunity they're pursuing in Ukraine. And now the war in Iran has put them right in the spotlight of governments around the world, starting with the sheikhs themselves. That said, the question is, do you think Ukraine will become the kind of Sparta they aspire to be? Do you think Europe could outsource part of its security needs to them? Let us know what you think in the comments. And of course, if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like it and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already. Take care, and I'll see you soon.